Good afternoon, how are you? Hope you've been very well. Today we're doing another painting. What I had planned for this week I couldn't do because I didn't have the colors, so stay tuned for that next week. This week's painting is very green. We are doing the Zombies Rising one. And as per usual, I'm bordering the outside of my page with some washi tape. You would think this would get easier as time goes on, but it really doesn't. This book is really big. Still using my trusty REMBRANDT soft pastels, I'm using a lime green, an olive green, a moss green, black and white today. To begin this painting, I am outlining the gravestones and tombstones that are appearing in the background and in the midground. I'm doing this lightly, just with a HB pencil, and it will be erased later, or colored over anyway, so you won't be able to see it. The hand in the middle, I go in and out and try and redraw it a couple times, so keep this one vague. I left it in to show you that it's just a process that you have to trust. I end up erasing it because after I apply the lime green soft pastel and I try to blend everything together, I ended up blending the graphite underneath, so it looked really muddy and I decided to include that bit last. This background requires a couple of layers. These greens, for some reason, didn't blend as full as some of the other colors because I think they needed to be layered underneath the initial application, but that's okay. So I apply a few layers of the lime green just to blend it out to give it an even tone, and I just do the same moving on. So I do spend a lot of time blending, and I'll be skipping through that because it took a while. The olive green I'm using as a blending color between the lime green and the moss green, and it gives it a sort of eerie vibe. Because it is a muted green, sort of green-brown color, it makes it look dirty and muggy, and it was good. It was good for this. I did struggle a little with the moss green. The moss green I feel like should have had the olive green underneath it. I do struggle. The majority of this video is just me making that dark green darker, but that's okay, we get there eventually. The initial shape of this background as well, it looks a lot like a U. That's because we are including a ground here and the sky is above us. It's not just into nothingness, it's not just emptiness, it is a U shape. I didn't have this problem with the black, but I don't know, different pigments do things differently, so just make sure you keep adding those layers until you're happy with them. I get happy with them later. I'm not too happy with them in the beginning, but I wanted to progress. I mentioned before that there's a lot of back and forth with this one as well. Soft pastels generally have a lot of back and forth because you're trying to balance colors and soften them and make them even all the way around. So I go back in with the lime green and I blend back the moss green and I use that mid green, that olive green, to balance everything out. I keep going back and forth. It's a process. But I wanted to make the middle of this image very bright and very as neon as I could get it. In my body painting it was easy because I had that lime green and I was able to do it nicely. The paper, I think, being white is what takes away from that moss green, but that's okay. So as per usual, I do my outlining in black. This time I'm keeping the outline on both sides and on the bottom. I'm not adding it to the top bar because the top part of the paper is just sky. Adding the black did help with the moss green because I was able to mix that black and green together, creating a darker blend, and it was nice. It worked really well. Okay, moving on. When you're happy with what you've done with your background, it's time to move on to the tombstone. So grab your black pastel and let's start outlining. Working with the light here, assuming the light is coming from the center of the page, because it is, the tombstones would be more shadowed on the outside of them. So I don't exactly draw the entire tombstone, I shade the outer portion of it facing the black side of either side of the tombstones. So the left ones, the black is further to the left, and on the right side they are further to the right. It gives them that 3D effect as well. I use the lime to go in on the opposite side to bring out the highlights and blend all that together to make it look soft and seamless, but still that there's something there. Because we don't want it to fade into the background, it's a foreground image. I'm adding a cross as well, just for some variety. I do want to mention that we are going to outline everything later, so it's not going to look as flat as it does now, it's just layering. So I've taken some pencils here. I've taken a white, a lime green, a bright green, and a black. I go in later with a dark green, but I didn't think I needed it at this point, and I start detailing. The detailing isn't really obvious on camera, it was just enough for me to see where I want to take the tombstone, how I want to shape it, and everything, so that's just for your own personal kind of use. And then the black is of course to outline the 3D shape and to outline around it so we see it there and it doesn't blend into that background. I'm not using a heavy hand to make that shape, I'm going back and forth using a light hand as much as I possibly can so I don't ruin the page and transfer onto the page before. For some reason I struggled to outline this cross. I know how to draw 3D shapes, it's not that hard, but for some reason it was not my favorite part of this video. I think at some point I just left it and I thought, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, there are zombies coming out of the ground. And just repeat everything with the other tombstones as well. What I like about using the soft pastels for this kind of detailing is it does look like a shadow, like it's been engulfed by the mist around it and behind it. Even though I will outline it and define it later, it looks like it's part of the ambience. I use the moss green pastel as well to give that 3D effect. I blend it from the black into the lime green. It gives it a really cool reflection effect. So here I'm doing an undertone of that olive green to have, I don't know, flowers, bushes, growth around the tombstones, indicating that they've been there a while, you know? It's not really refined at this point because it's the first layer, but I've tried to make it look like it's growing unevenly and just around the tombstone and off into the background. But it's also useful because it looks like they're not exactly floating, they're part of the image. I use the moss green for darker detailing, I'll use the lime green later for lighter detailing, the black as well for some darker detailing. At this point you're just eyeballing it, whatever makes it feel like it's, you know, the light and shadows in the right place, it's grounded in the right places, and it gives it a little extra details. I really do think that black pulls everything together, whether it's an outline or a shadow or whatever you're doing. The contrast that black provides, white as well, but in this case it's black, it just makes everything feel like it's just coming together, and I love it. And as much as we love that dark contrast, we love that light contrast as well. So we're adding some highlights with that lime green on the opposite ends of where we added the black, and it makes it look very 3D. If you're confused as to where to put your blacks and your lights, like I said before, the light source here is coming from the center of the image. So when you're applying your highlights, you apply them closer to that part of the image, and your darkness is the furthest away. Same goes for every kind of 3D shape that you try and draw, but I mean, if you're learning, it's always a good thing to remember. And there's not really a right or wrong to how many shrubs and flowers and stuff that you create. I go a little hardcore because I get lost in the detail, but it's always up to you. Now I've taken my black pencil and I start doing cracks in these gravestones. I like these little details because it does give the gravestones a little more character and they're not just slabs of shape in the middle of my drawing. Plus, it gives it a very weathered look. So while the colors are bright and, you know, in your face, the tombstones look like they've been there a while and the corpses are getting kind of sick of being in the ground. And I'm also outlining that darker part of the tombstone. This hand, it took me a very long time to get it the way that I wanted it, and in the end I don't even think it turned out the way I really wanted it. Dry pastels with detailing, it's a very different process to when you're using pencils because it's obviously thicker and, I mean, ultimately a different medium, right? So my hand turned out as good as I could get it with the tools that I was using. It didn't turn out bad, I just wasn't used to doing details with this medium. But I'm doing the same thing that I was doing with the tombstones. Black is coming from underneath it and I try to bring the lightness up. Ultimately, it was difficult to maintain the whole hand this way because it was blending too much into the lime green behind it. So I made the green deeper and then added the highlights and the darkness after that to give it more of a foreground appearance and so you can actually see it, you know? And then I take my black pencil again and I outline everything. The hand itself wasn't hard to draw, but because it's so big next to the tombstones, it did feel a bit cartoony and out of proportion. I had to make it look as creepy as I wanted. The nails are a bit sharp, but other than that, it's a pretty decent mutilated arm, don't you think? There are no holes or worms coming out of it. It was too small to create that kind of detailing. This is when I bring in my dark green pencil because I realized I needed it. And I use it to color in all of the parts that my moss green pastel couldn't fill in. Luckily for me, they are pretty close in color. And so I go in just coloring it in like I have been coloring in my previous videos, very lightly, cross-hatching, making it darker gradually, not pressing too heavy onto the page. And this way, going between the black pencil and the green pencil makes the shade and the fading and the blending so much easier for me. The torn up ground around the hand I do with dry pastels, just like I did with the gravestones, and that worked out really well. I did it differently, wherein I went with that moss green instead of the olive green because it was in the foreground and I needed it to be darker, but I do use that olive green later to bring out some highlights. And it's just the same thing that I've been doing, so the lime green for the highlights, the dark greens and the blacks for the darknesses, and for the smaller details I do go in with that black pencil. And I try to make it look, you know, textured and bushy and muddy and mulchy. As opposed to around the gravestones, they look kind of smooth, the bushes. This one I wanted it to look a bit more rough. When I said before about the layering and the back and forth, I wasn't too happy with the background yet, so I kept going in with that moss green, with the black, with the lime green, with the olive green, a little bit more, just to make sure that I was doing everything that I could to make it blend. Not forgetting, of course, to outline the black as close to the tape as I can so that when I pull the tape off, it's a very refined line. And it's time. It's time to pull off all that washi tape and watch everything come together. I spray with a little bit of that matte setting spray, and that's it for today. Ultimately, I am very happy with how this one turned out. Each one seems to be a challenge in its own different way, but I'm very happy with the result, and I'm so grateful again that you're back and watching these videos. I'm having a lot of fun making these, and I can't wait to get into some original pieces when this whole series is over. But as always, if you enjoy this video, please leave it a like, and if you'd like to see more, consider subscribing. I'll see you again next time. Bye.